Hey everyone, this is Eric Huey, host of the GenWhy Leaders Podcast, where we interview and learn from millennials who are leaders in their fields. These are individuals who have started their own businesses, have a high-ranking title within companies, or simply pursuing non-traditional means, such as their passion or hobby, to support themselves and their families. There still exists this negative stigma around our generation that we are entitled, lazy, and unreliable. So my goal is to prove that wrong, while also inspiring millennials to become the best versions of themselves and go after their big goals. On this episode of the GenWhy Leaders Podcast, Marie Baldwin, Digital Art Director at Trozzolo Communications Group, tells us about the importance of pivoting when your back is against the wall. Being a traditional graphic designer and fresh out of college when the recession hit in 2008, Marie had to find ways to add value to herself as an employee or risk being laid off. She did that by learning website design and development. Now being able to speak to both the creative and technical sides of design, Marie is blazing trails and providing more value than ever to her employer and her clients that she works with on a daily basis. Here's my interview with Marie Baldwin. All right, here live with Marie Baldwin at Trozzolo Communications Group, an old coworker of mine. She's a great friend as well. And Marie, appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and have this podcast.
Absolutely. Bucket list.
Yeah, right? So I usually just start off pretty basic as far as just kind of introducing yourself to listeners. Maybe tell us who you are and what you do for a living.
Sure. So I am Marie Baldwin. I am the Digital Art Director at Trozzolo Communications Group here in Kansas City. I'm born and raised KC girl. Went to Avila, got my degree in graphic design, and then kind of moved over into the digital space.
Awesome. Yeah, look forward to the conversation. Each episode has a theme. And so we've talked about sacrifice and self-awareness and taking massive action. So today's theme's all going to be about pivot. And so look forward to this conversation with Marie. Before we get into that, I also ask each interviewee what their why is, seeing as how the title of the podcast is Gen Y for Generation Y, WHY. What keeps you motivated when, at the end of the day, what keeps you coming back to work?
I really appreciate the lack of monotony in a career, and I think I have found a really great place for that here at Trozzolo and sort of for my personality. The backstory on that is my mom was one of the sort of first graphic designers that I ever met. She changed careers in sort of the middle of her life and back then it was like a 2-year degree, but I was young enough that I got to attend some classes in school with her and thought it was really interesting. And art had always been something I was drawn to anyway, and this just kind of became an easy way to manifest all of those drawings of, courses and things that I did when I was a kid.
All the drawings that wound up on the fridge, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess diving a little bit deeper into that, what do you like most about your job?
I really thrive on the social aspect of this job. I really like collaboration. I like brainstorms. I like teams. I did sports as a kid, so I've always been kind of that sort of social person anyway. And I feel like if I were in an office by myself all day long, I would probably go a little mad. So that's one of the big draws for me, is just the social aspect of it and being able to collaborate. I also really like being around people who I can learn things from. That's kind of one of my things. I sort of keep people around me that know more stuff about other things that I don't. So being around a lot of really great creatives and writers and strategy people has been invaluable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time here when I was here. Definitely, not to sound too cliche, but a team of A players, for sure. Everybody's very skilled, to your point. And on top of that, I like what you said about the atmosphere and the culture, because it does feel very much like a family.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of those types of little one-offs about Trozzolo that are really sort of endearing and fun and different.
Yeah, for sure. Makes a good place to call work home. Diving a little bit deeper into your career path, our generation has got this negative stigma around it that we're called job hoppers, right? They're only at a job a few years before we move on. You have not taken that route, obviously. You've been here 12 years, is that correct?
Well, officially 12. Unofficially, I was at 5 years at a previous agency, and Trozzolo acquired that agency. And what they do when they acquire a company is they grandfather in those tenured years.
That's right.
So altogether, 12, 5 at my old agency and 7 technically at Trozzolo.
Okay, very nice. Well, still, yeah.
Yeah, very long time.
Even 7 years is something to write home about for sure for our generation. So, tell us more about that. Is it, again, some of the culture that plays into that, feeling like you're continuing your education every day?
For sure. So I'll back up just a little. When I was in school as a designer, I know that some of the other schools around here do this, but we always did agency tours as like seniors, and I knew immediately that I was an agency girl. Like I knew that the culture, which is very, very important to me, was something that I was attracted to. The team aspect, the creative aspect. I don't have to wear a suit every day. I don't have to wear heels every day. And so that was super important for me. But then, I think everybody has to kind of figure out what is most important to them in a career and in a job. And you have to decide whether you're going to stick out the rough years or the rough months. And I found when I started my career, I was around some really, really smart and really, really great people. I was at a very small agency. And then as I moved over into Trozzolo, I really enjoy the culture here. There are some logistical things about it, like it's close to my house and, those types of things. But I've also been allowed to sort of niche out a really unique spot in this agency. And that's kind of invaluable to me. And I also really like accruing lots of paid vacation because I like to travel. And when you job hop, you don't really get that all the time.
Yeah, pretty much got to start back at
right.
the square one with vacation and things like that. In addition to being very busy, as we've talked about, and as I try to keep up with you, you've also got some side gigs going on with Cherry Street Studio and being an adjunct professor. I guess tell us a little bit about each one of those and maybe why you decided to take those on.
The side gigs are kind of a surprise. I think as I moved more into the digital space and doing more digital work every day, I was kind of missing that like old school graphic design stuff that I was doing. And so the Etsy shop which is what Cherry Street Studio is. It's a little Etsy shop and an Instagram that I run. It allows me to do some fun, straight up graphic design. So I do little custom themed party invitations for baby showers and girls' nights and birthdays and things. And it just kind of sits there. I get a couple orders a month and I turn and burn those really quickly, but it's a fun little outlet for me. And through that, I have a couple of moms here at the agency who, kind of just use me every time they have a kid who has a birthday or a party that they want to celebrate, which is awesome. Great. So that gives me a little bit of a side creative outlet that lets me do sort of more of my original goal to be a designer. And then I get to do the digital stuff here at the agency. And then as the side gig for adjunct professing, I never would have thought that I would do that, but I'm heavily involved in the Avila design program.
Cool.
And I go back and do portfolio reviews every year, and I've kind of done that for a really long time. And they were just in a rough spot where they had a professor kind of quit in the middle of the year and needed me to pick up. And so, after some coaxing and some heavy planning and a little crash course in teaching from my husband, who teaches at Liberty High School, I was able to conjure together a little Web 1 class. We did a little intro into web design and strategy and wireframing things, and then we did some social media and some email design.
Very cool.
So it was a lot more fun than I think I was expecting it to be.
Yeah.
And I think that it was a really interesting challenge for me to sort of organize all of that information, all of that experience into like a palatable way to talk to the kids about what I do and what the opportunities are for designers aside from traditional print or some of the more cool stuff like letterpress or wedding design, things like that. So I think graphic designers don't necessarily always think about social media and email design as options, and I think that was a really fun way for me to sort of expand that view a little bit.
Definitely, for sure. Yeah, like I like what your point about being surprised about how rewarding it was, almost, because I've heard that from other people who've gone to some teaching roles. I'm sure it's cool to look back at being in the student's position where you once were, and then realize how much knowledge you've accumulated over the years, and be able to kind of distill that back to them.
For sure. It was really cool. And, I have to give huge props to my husband, who helped me really organize, because, teaching, I taught a 2.5 hour once a week class, and it's one thing to come up with 50 minutes worth, or I had guest lectured a few times and sat in as sort of a guest professor the fall before on a web unit that they did, and sort of just came in and kind of talked about process and things like that, but to really create it myself and try to keep a bunch of 19, 20, and 21-year-olds attention for a couple of hours on a Thursday night was another challenge in and of itself. And I think when you come into that kind of space in your student career and you're ready to like get a job, and so I really tried to make it, this is what you could be doing. It wasn't about like high level, big brand type stuff. It was really like nitty gritty. Here are the foundations that you can use to sort of expand your ability to design for whatever medium you're going to be asked to do.
Right. Sounds like good practical knowledge that they could
Let's
apply.
hope so.
Yeah,
I'll let you know if they get any jobs.
Maybe send you some hate mail.
Right.
I'm sure you did a great job, and that they're all going to be landing big gigs sooner or later. So kind of in that same vein of thinking, as far as teaching them your knowledge, what are some of the common, I guess, trends or practices that you're seeing in web design right now that people should be aware of? Because we have all sorts of people listening to the podcast, as far as solo entrepreneurs to small businesses to people in the corporate setting.
Sure. So I feel like typography is having sort of a comeback. I'm seeing a lot of really interesting, we kind of went through that like hand lettered sort of chalk feel a few years ago, and that kind of got a little bit cleaner as hand lettering became more digitized. I'm seeing a lot of like manipulated fonts now, and there's also a lot of texture. So the super flat, solid color that we kind of went through with material design and Google a few years ago is also kind of coming around, and we're seeing a little bit more grit and a little bit more organic texture, which I'm really excited about. I think, the neon thing and the 90s thing is coming back also, which is kind of interesting. I read a little article on Shutterstock the other day that has like the 2019 trends, and it's a lot of like patterns and bright colors. And I think if you were to look at, some of the big cool brands here in Kansas City and agency stuff that's going on, you'll start to see a lot of that. I was kind of looking on, Willoughby and Whiskey and Hallmark's Instagrams the other day, and you can definitely see a lot of like really great color being used and texture and typography. And I think it's going to kind of continue to move into, it's definitely there in the social media space, but I think we're going to start seeing another wave of like really interesting web design and web development here in the next year or two.
What would you say are some of the, top 3, top 5 tips that you would give anyone to start a website if they're like starting their own business or promoting a service? Like, what are some of those like the basic ingredients, if you will, to like make sure you have this, avoid this, anything that comes to mind in that?
Sure.
In that
gosh, it's definitely super unique to product and industry for sure, but I think I would say don't overdo it yourself. Keep everything very simple and build on it over time. I think one of the biggest lessons we try to teach our clients, at least in the agency, is that a website is not a finished product. It is a living, breathing thing. And I think one of the misnomers is like you have to launch with everything ready. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. If you need to launch with like a homepage, about it page, and a contact page, like do it, and then add in a service page or add in, additional bells and whistles as you get time and content and money, of course. But I think, just really get it down to your basic information, what will help you sell whatever you're selling and tell your story, and then kind of move it up from there. I think there's a big misnomer about video or, having a heavy social presence and feeling like you have to be on multiple channels, and you really don't. Just keep everything super core, and if you can do those things right, then you can build your business that way and then expand later on.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think especially in today's age where everything is digital, things move so quick, projects move so quick, it's like you could alter your website pretty quickly, and people such as like yourself, an agency contact is an email away or a phone call away to change something, or if somebody's working in-house, they usually have access to some of the basic stuff that they could change quickly. So
agencies are expensive, like honestly, because you're paying for a lot of people's salaries to touch your brand stuff. I think it's really interesting right now that there are whole businesses just on Instagram. Mm-hmm. You can have a business on Instagram. You can have a business on a site like Etsy where you can sell product and you can sell things, and you don't have to build your own website. I mean, you definitely can, but there are things that will do that for you. There's absolutely no harm in a Wix or a Squarespace or a WebDo or a WordPress if you need something a little fancier. And I just, clean, simple content, some really good headlines, and that's pretty much all you need.
Yeah, good advice. So as I mentioned earlier, each episode has a theme, and I do my best to try to convey some value in the episode to listeners that they can walk away with. So the theme I have for this interview is pivoting, because as I've learned in your past, and as you've already mentioned in this interview, you started off doing traditional graphic design and have segued into more web development and design. So explain kind of that initial process of what led you to do that and how it's benefited you in the long term.
Sure. So I took an opportunity in the downturn of the economy in like 2008. I was newly graduated. I think I was probably the last class. I graduated in December of 2007. I was probably part of that last class that was able to get a job before the economy really took a turn, and we had kind of a lot of college graduates going, I don't know what to do, or would end up doing things not associated with their degree. So I feel really lucky about that. So I was working in a small agency. We were building up a web team, and they were having to lay people off or take people down to part-time, and I really couldn't afford to do that. And so to kind of add value to myself as an employee, I said, hey, you need an image swapped out on a website, you need some copy updated, you need a button design, like I'll do it. Just tell me how big and what we are talking about. And I had, a couple of really invaluable mentors who sort of helped me learn just that basic HTML stuff. And then, as people didn't want to pay for paper anymore, email marketing became really important, and it was cheaper than websites. It was a great way to market. It kind of became that direct mail substitute for a little while. And I sort of took it upon myself to kind of take on the constant contact and what that means and those best practices, and starting some of that design. And that's become one of my specialties over time. And it has been a huge value to me as an employee to have sort of this double-sided knowledge of traditional graphic design and some digital design. And
it increases your value tenfold to your company and your clients you're working with.
And I think one of the unsung benefits of it that I keep coming into over and over again, that I keep hearing, is I'm able to speak to both non-technical and technical, which is not something that you can really learn in class or in a degree. there are developers and they speak their speak, and there are designers and they speak their speak. And for me to kind of walk the line in between to help make sure that the vision of the designer is accurately articulated to the developer, and the developer's limitations and time is accurately articulated to the designer, really helps, I think, our agency work as a bigger team. And it gives me, a bit of autonomy over helping both sides. So the designers really trust that I can help them get their vision created, and the developers really trust that I'm going to tell the designer when they've gone a little too far, or that's going to cost a little too much time or
that'd even work.
Budget. Yeah. So I think that's probably one of my biggest talents, I guess, the skills that I've had manifest over just that little transition. But I enjoy it, and I've got, whenever I have an itch to do something basic graphic design, as you say, I have an outlet for that as well. So, again, no monotony, really just having a great time.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Good. Yeah, it's awesome. It's amazing what you can learn and adapt to when your back's put up against the wall, so to speak, by unfortunate situations.
It would have been really easy for me to just say, okay, I'm out, I'll walk away and try to find another job. It would have been really difficult at that point in 2008, 2009. But, again, bad years, decided to stick it out, ended up at a really great agency right about the time that I was ready to kind of move up in my career and get into a space that had bigger budgets and bigger clients, and I was ready to do that. And it just kind of, I maybe held out a little too long with the other agency, but I think it worked out well for me in the end. And I've manifested a great little, like I said, unique niche here at Trozzolo, and they allow me to do a lot of different things, which is great.
Sounds like it. Kudos to you. When you're thinking about a total career change or even a pivot like we're talking about now, you can be met with some resistance, sometimes not even from people in your network or your peers, but sometimes people closest to you. What was the response like from your closest family and friends, your husband, when you were making that transition? Were they excited for you? Were they telling you to proceed with caution? What was that experience like?
Gosh, it's been so long. I hardly remember. I was not married at the time. I was definitely, supporting myself. Like you said, back up against a wall, it turned into, survival mode. Like, I was brand new in my career. I loved the little agency that I was at. They, for context, that entire agency was invited to my wedding,
Nice.
6-7 years later. And there are so many people from that time in my life that are still just dear, dear people to me. And so, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to get laid off. I didn't want to go find another job. And so I feel like if you are in a place that you like that much, you'll kind of do anything to stick around. And if that meant that, I was swapping out images instead of designing them, or, picking stock photography instead of going on photo shoots, I was willing to do that. And I just, I had to recognize that I could use some of the skills that I had wanted to use for other things for this digital side, and that kind of worked out for me. Mm-hmm. But, I have a lot of good friends who are still classic designers. I have friends who are at Hallmark now doing some really interesting things. I also have friends that were with me at Avila who are now doing digital stuff, and I also have friends who are doing like 3D signage now, so totally different ways. And I think, from a design perspective and a creative perspective, that kind of definition has changed too. It's very much less like I'm a graphic designer, I'm a UX designer. And I tend to think of it more as I'm a creative, mm-hmm. and that creativity and that kind of knowledge can be, applied to social media or email or, typography, whether it's 3D typography in a 6-foot letter form or on a website. And I think a lot of kind of what's happening now, and with Adobe Cloud being available to 16-year-olds who are shooting ads for Nike and Adidas and that kind of thing. Like
right.
It's really about an eye and taste, and less about classic train and what your job and job title is. And I think if you surround yourself with the right people, they're going to support you no matter what.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Good advice. To your point about having a creative eye and kind of just that natural knack to see things and be creative and align things the way they should be, what are some of the resources that you use, for creative inspiration or to get ideas?
Oh gosh, travel for sure. And maybe that's come with age as well. So, there was a time when we all read blogs, and I still love some of my more traditional graphic stuff. I love like Oh So Beautiful paper, which is like invitations and print and foils and fun stuff. I really like watching, some of the like really cool creative shows on Netflix, the Chef's Table and the No Reservations. Anthony Bourdain is like one of my favorite shows. There's also one, it's like Tales of Light about photography. And I as a quote creative, I find inspiration all over the place. I love watching, the VMAs as, someone who's in their mid-30s, and just kind of seeing like what kind of cool stuff they do to promote those social media posts. Like what kind of design stuff are they using for those kids who are interested and that are engaging with those brands. I get I always look at like, New York Fashion Week and Paris Fashion Week just to see what's happening in design and, Pantone Color of the Year. So there's like so many great social media or website or brand content that you can consume as a creative that helps kind of spark ideas. Also, just keeping smart people around you is great. You never know when a coffee or a drink is gonna give you some sort of idea or tagline or ad concept idea.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that.
Yeah, definitely. You're in the right place to have smart people surrounding you. That's for sure. Trozzolo is an awesome spot. So I guess to kind of wrap this up for any listeners, what advice would you have for them?
Be patient. Just like learning a new skill is difficult. It's not going to be easy. You're not going to be that good at it. And you're going to get a lot of feedback, and you're going to have a lot of, trials and bad days and bad weeks and really great successes and stuff that you feel like should have been great that didn't turn out so great. It took me a long time to learn how to develop a website. And so it's important, if you're going to pivot, to have, either it be something that you eat and live and breathe every single day and you're going to never get tired of it, or to pivot for extra PTO or money or whatever that is, and to have something on the side that is going to give you creative renewal or is going to give you an outlet for something else, whether it's writing a blog or contributing to, a newspaper article, column, or adjunct professing, adjunct teaching. So I think pivoting is always going to be kind of a scary thing, and it's definitely doable. I think a lot of companies like employees that can wear a lot of hats. I
such as yourself.
Yeah, such as myself. Which may be a few too many hats. But that's what I thrive on. I don't want to come to work every day and do the same thing. And I think that you have to decide, what kind of day you want to have. And if you like to show up and not know, then throwing yourself off the cliff to say, yeah, I'll help you do that. Whether it's holding a camera or writing something or brainstorming for a healthcare app that you will not work on. you just have to be willing to say, yeah, I will speak to that, and I might have an idea or two, and not worry if it gets used or it's any good, but your comment may spark someone else's great idea, and you still have stake in that.
For sure. So to wrap up the show, where can people best get a hold of you if they want advice on pivoting their career or design advice, things like that?
Sure. So you can find me at Trozzolo, M Baldwin at Trozzolo.com, and that's 2 Z's and 1 L. It's important distinction.
Very much so.
At Twitter at Rena Baldwin Casey, RENA Baldwin Casey, and then on Instagram at Lipstick and Lager.
Awesome. Marie, thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up today's episode. I want to thank you all again for listening. My name is Eric Huey, and my goal is to provide you with inspiring content that helps you do your job better or go after your big goals. I'd appreciate your feedback with a rating or review on whichever platform you found the show. And if you'd like to share your feedback directly, or if you know someone who would be a great guest on the show, feel free to email me directly at GenWhyLeaders@gmail.com. That's GenWhyLeaders@gmail.com. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.